Donald Trump just canceled an interview that had been set up for weeks and weeks. Like, they've been working on this, the Shade Room. I'm not familiar with this show. To be honest with you, I'm not familiar with any show. Although I did go on the Vanguard yesterday, and people can check that out.
Oh, those guys are great.
I think it's behind a paywall, but maybe they'll open it up. I don't know. And I was
saw
on
some clips.
Wajahat Ali's show that he does on his Substack. Left Hook, I think it's called, earlier in the week, too. Meanwhile, the Trump campaign had spent weeks in conversations with the Shade Room. I think this is from the Washington Post or New York Times?
Politico had this, basically, and the Shade Room is a website geared towards, like, basically young black people, and I think last week Harris had done an interview with them, and this is the second, at least, major interview this week that Trump has canceled at the last minute.
Yep. In response, a Trump advisor had told Shade Room producers that Trump was, quote, exhausted and refusing interviews, but that could change at any time, according to people familiar with the conversations.
Based on his, like, Adderall dosage, but they're calling him Sleepy Don. He's exhausted?
Apparently, Trump supporting rapper Waka Flocka Flame was offered as an alternative, these two people say.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's where Waka Flocka's career has gone?
Well, you know, the thing about Waka Flocka does the weave, too. So that may have
I have
helped.
no idea what you're talking about.
The weave.
When you talk about Rosie O'Donnell, and all of a sudden you talk about Hannibal Lecter, and then you're talking about the border and the sharks.
I call it the weave.
I thought it was the bob and the weave.
No, it's the weave. I call it the weave.
Okay.
A lot of literary scholars at Penn University.
My uncle went to MIT.
Yeah, we did hear that before.
All right, let's get to this. So Donald Trump, in the midst of, like, not having the energy to go on the Shade Room, he did, of course, he has a tunnel from Trump Tower that goes into the Fox and Friends studio. And he got there, but one of the things that happens with this tunnel, just to explain to people so that you can see this, put this still graphic up there, and then we can roll it. I just want to, so people aren't confused. One of the things that happens when this tunnel, it actually shrinks your body mass by 15%. And so he looks tiny up here.
And old.
Elderly.
Yep.
Yeah.
Hello, darkness, my old friend. He's just staring into the abyss.
So here is, they're presumably talking to him.
On the curvy couch.
Yeah, they're on the curvy couch. He spent about 5 minutes talking about how, like, I'm the only one who gets to sit in the center. Nobody else does this. And then he starts obviously complaining about Fox News.
But you know the difference? In the old days, you never played negative ads. In other words, when I leave here, I'll then be hit by 5 or 6 ads. And in the old days, you never had Ian
Fox
Sams.
News.
Yeah. Well, in the old days. But in the old days, which wasn't so... when I leave, I'll have...
Pause it for a second. I just want... Let's replay that little exchange, because I don't think anybody knows what he's talking about. The old days. Like, are you talking, like, pre-television? Or are you talking, like, when... And Killmeat is like, you mean Fox News?
Like, I mean, I know this whole audience is really old people watching Fox and Friends in the morning, but I don't know if he wants to keep going down the road of being like, back in my day, as his age and cognitive issues kind of come into the forefront.
But is he talking about 8 years ago? I mean, that's the thing, is that nobody can understand what he's referencing.
Yeah, they would have ran ads against him back then, like for Jeb Bush and stuff.
I think he's trying to say that back in the old days, in 2016, Fox News was more supportive of him, and now they're not.
You never played negative ads. In other words, when I leave here, I'll then be hit by 5 or 6 ads. And in the old days, you never had Ian
Fox
Sams.
News.
Yeah. Well, in the old days. But in the old days, which wasn't so... when I leave, I'll have 12 people from Kamala on, and, you know, pretty much unopposed. For 19 days, I don't think we should do that anymore. I think that you shouldn't play negative ads. It's very tough. You do a show, and I complain all the time about it. I love complaining. I like to have everything perfect. But when I leave here, I'll have 200 people from...
Because they buy time on Fox.
And, you know, by the time you do it, you say, what are you doing? It's sort of a net, net neutral. Well, we'll see what happens.
A net neutral. You know, this, honestly, like, we can talk about the idea of how old Donald Trump is, but that moment where everybody's sort of like laughing at something that's more like not necessarily funny, but sort of charactery, like, oh, this guy's an old character, really honestly reminded me of trips that I would take to the nursing home to see my great uncle Saul, who my son is named after. An amazing character, well into his 90s, and even he made it to 104. Wow. But that quality of like, we're not going to interrupt, and
he's just being himself.
We throw out one word to like clarify, just so that we can get into the vague ballpark of what he's talking about, and then we just sort of laugh because he's quite a character. He likes to complain. That it's really starting to take on that hue now. And here is later in that interview, I think it is, after he's done complaining, he starts talking about, this is about public schools, right?
It's not anything to do with school choice, but also separate from school choice. We're going to take the Department of Education, close it. I'm going to close it. We'll have one person, could be you if you decide to retire.
Okay, Mr. President, here's what bothers
central cast.
Here's what bothers me about that. So let's say you have a liberal city, let's Los Angeles, San Diego, and they just decide we're going to get rid of that history. We got new history. This is America built off the backs of slaves on stolen land. And that curriculum comes in.
Then we don't send them money. We would save half of our budget.
Okay.
But wait a second. How are they not sending the money if they don't have the Department of Education?
And how
Juicy out of central casting.
How can you look like you're out of central casting as the man Trump will hire to close down the Department of Education? I mean, I guess he could be related to Beth.
You've got glasses. And so that's what he is, smart. But also, can we just go back over what Kilmeade is complaining could be taught in the schools? Because he seems to be saying, like, what if a school decides to actually teach history? And won't that be problematic?
Department of Education, close it. I'm going to close it. We'll have one person, could be you if you decide to retire.
Okay, Mr. President, here's what bothers
central cast.
Here's what bothers me about that. So let's say you have a liberal city, let's Los Angeles, San Diego, and they just decide we're going to get rid of that history.
Oh, pause it again. I'm sorry, folks, but San Diego, is that a liberal city?
No. Isn't that is that where La Jolla is or whatever?
No, San Diego's down to the south there, and it is
more conservative.
It is one of the most conservative parts, I think, like, that, that's not out in the sort of, the desert, essentially. That is the most conservative parts of California. But all right, I don't mean to be nitpicky about this, but let's just go back. And I also love the Trump go like central casting. Wait, is there some other part that I should be listening to? What?
I want a compilation every time Trump said central casting.
Yeah.
About that. So let's say you have a liberal city, let's Los Angeles, San Diego, and they just decide we're going to get rid of that history. We got new history. This is America built off the backs of slaves on stolen land. And that curriculum comes in.
Then we don't send them money. We would save half of our budget.
Okay.
Is there more to this? I'm sort of curious as to where he's going. We'd save half of our budget if we just didn't spend half of it or something. It's nuts.
He's not doing great.
No, and they're not doing great either. I mean, San Diego, someone just has been run by Republicans for literally decades.
It's like saying Orange County is such a blue.
Yeah.
No, we know that's a conservative area of California. Or it's like, I mean, it would be like him saying, Long Island over there, they're such like commies. It's like, okay, it's a blue state, but that's clearly a conservative area of the state.
I mean, even have we had have we had any type of curriculum that hasn't included the idea that the country was built on the back of slaves and on stolen land? Like, what's the alternate version of that?
And
we fed and housed all the slaves at our expense, and we borrowed the land from the indigenous people.
I mean, look at things.
So as to upgrade it.
Yeah, we improved everything.
Yep.
We've just the fact that this dude is saying we're going to eliminate the Department of Education and it barely makes any headlines just shows like I don't what he's done to our politics.
Well, we got to talk about
this
transport.
This is also, we should say, like, this has been the Republican line for at least 2 decades. It's just that they now have a reason to do it. Before, it was just they needed to come up with a reason because, of course, the education department is, attempts to provide some equalization for across the country in terms of schools and provides funding for stuff that the schools would rather not have to deal with whatsoever, and also makes them adhere to civil rights for all sorts of people who have been denied them in the context of education in the past. And frankly, I hate to make this about Reconstruction again, but Reconstruction was the era in which the so-called radical Republicans of that time instituted essentially public school as a federal mandate. And because there was an understanding at that time that this is how you make good citizens. And the idea that it still lives within the context of the federal government goes right back ultimately to the racist resent of the federal government providing education for a wide array of Americans, particularly at that time, freedmen and freed kids, essentially. Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.